Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Common Grounds. We are so excited that you're viewing us online.
Tonight's message is taught by me in our last message of the Make a Difference series. We would love for you to join us live on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. at 14 Monroe Avenue. We would love for you to join us then, but if you can't, continue watching us online. Here's the last lesson in I Will Make a Difference. Tonight we are wrapping up our Be the Difference, moving from intention to action series. We've been walking through this for the past couple of weeks with the whole idea of everybody, each and every one of us, we want our lives to matter. I don't think I've ever met a person, and you probably won't either, who just wants to live a mediocre life whose life makes no impact. Everybody wants their life to matter for something. We want to make a difference. We want people to, know our names. We want what we do to change the world. But a lot of us, we have the greatest intentions in the world, but we never actually put action to those intentions. And so this series has really looked at how can we put intention to the actions, or how can we put actions to the intentions that we have in our lives. So we have great intentions. How do we put works behind it? Tonight we're going to talk about the attitude that makes a difference. And so we've talked about attitude here before, but I think attitude is so important when it comes to not only making a difference in your own life, but making a difference in the lives of other people as well. Because your attitude is just so important. So the first question that I have is, how does your attitude impact your actions? How does your attitude impact your actions? This is the time of the lesson where there's feedback, You talk to me. Not a rhetorical question. Yeah. Just changes the way that you respond and the way that you act, and yeah. You won't put your best foot forward. Yeah, you won't put your best effort forward. I'm reading a book right now, and I can't remember the statistic, but it was like 70% of people said that they could double their work ethic or they could double their production at work if they wanted to. If they really wanted to, they could probably double their work ethic or double their production if they just simply wanted to. Your attitude, it changes your actions so much. And a lot of us in our Christian walk, we don't impact the world for Jesus like we should. And it really boils down to we just don't have the right attitude behind it. We don't have enough conviction behind it. We don't have the right outlook on it. And because of that, it impacts our actions. And so tonight we're going to look at Philippians 1:12 through 30 and see this idea of how our attitude based on Paul, who looks at Jesus, can change our actions. So I'm going to read this and kind of break down sections. So first we're going to be in 12 through 20, then we're going to read 21 through 28, and then we'll read 29 and 30. So we'll start off 12 through 20. This is Paul speaking here, and it says this. Now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me, so this is Paul talking, he's been thrown in prison, so he's in jail writing this from prison. And so what has happened to me, being Paul in jail, has actually resulted in the advance of the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to everyone else that my imprisonment is in the cause of Christ. Most of the brothers in the Lord have gained confidence from my imprisonment and dare even more to speak the message fearlessly. To be sure, some preach Christ out of envy and strife, but others out of goodwill. These do so out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The others proclaim Christ out of rivalry, not sincerely seeking the cause, We'll just start over. Verse 17. The others proclaim Christ out of rivalry, not sincerely, seeking to cause me anxiety in my imprisonment. What does it matter? Just that in every way, whether out of false motives or true, Christ is proclaimed. And in this I rejoice. Yes, I will rejoice, because I know this will lead to my deliverance through your prayers and help from the Spirit of Jesus Christ.
My eager expectation and hope is that I will not be ashamed about anything, but that now, as always, with all boldness, Christ will be highly honored in my body, whether by life or by death. The first thing that we need to see in this idea of attitude and moving from intention to action is the attitude to evaluate. The attitude to evaluate. Why is evaluation important? Why do you think it's important to evaluate? Shows you where you stand, yeah. What else? It's a starting point, yeah. So you maybe evaluate at the beginning, what are things that I need to do, what are things that need to get done. As you start through the process, you can evaluate in what areas do I need to improve on, what things do I need to get rid of, what things do I need to work on. Evaluation is very important. And here we see that if we were to be honest with ourselves, our outlook on the world, our outlook on life is probably not like Paul's here in this scripture. So what we just saw was that Paul's in jail, and he was thrown in jail for preaching the gospel. And then he has some people come behind him who didn't like him, who thought he was just preaching false things, and they were just all about themselves. And so they go preaching the same gospel, not with the same motives as Paul was, but they go preaching the gospel just to kind of mock Paul and say, ha ha, you were thrown in prison for preaching about Jesus. Look at me, I'm preaching about Jesus and nothing is happening to me. And if like we were in that situation, we'd probably be pretty upset because we're like, why do you have to be so petty? Why are you being so childish? You're supposed to be a grown adult, and yet you are just doing things to get under my skin. And so for me and you, it would probably cause anger inside of ourselves, resentment, bitterness against that person, against other people, maybe even against God, because we're like, God, we were doing these actions under right motives. And here you have people doing it under wrong motives, just doing it really not only to mock me, but God to mock you. And I'm the one getting punished. But that's not how Paul relates to this. Paul says, who cares? Whether they do it under good motives or not, the gospel is being proclaimed. And a lot of us, we get so worried about what everybody else is doing. We get so wrapped up in what everybody else is doing and the actions that they take that it keeps us from doing the actions that God has called us to do. And so the first thing that we see is that we need to have an attitude of evaluation, and we need to look at our lives and see, what are areas in my life that I need to grow in? What are some areas in my life that I maybe am not as strong in because maybe I've made excuses, or maybe I've just been angry, or maybe I've let these rifts or these complications get in the way, and so I'm not doing what God has called me to do. Maybe there's rivalry going on. Sadly, we see this among churches a lot of times. Even though we have different church names on our door, we all are supposed to serve under the banner of Jesus. And so if we're all focusing on the same goal, then it won't matter if it's your church that is winning people to Jesus or the church down the road that's winning people to Jesus. We're just proclaiming that Jesus is being preached and that people are coming to know Him. So focusing on a goal promotes to there not being any rivalry and to ultimately think of others over yourself. And that's what it's all about. And it's hard to do this whenever you have sin in your life. I read a quote that said, "The more I am aware of my own sins, the more quickly I can forgive those who sin against me." When we evaluate and realize the sin that we have in our lives, we're going to be more lenient in the lives of other people. We're going to be able to work with other people more, because even if they wrong us, even if they do things that make us upset and angry, if we are constantly evaluating our lives and looking, how can I be better? How can I do better? How can I look more like Jesus? How can I act more like Paul did in this message? It all points back to that. One of the most, I guess, beautiful pictures, one of my favorite scriptures of the Bible, especially now, and I'm reading this book, and I'm going to read you a little section out of it, the 23rd Pastor. I'm sure you're all familiar with the 23rd Psalm. It's read at a lot of funerals and things like that, and we're going to read it tonight. But this is like David's prayer to God, pretty much. And so if you'll look at Psalm 23, it's on the back of your sheet if you want to look at that. It says this. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd. There's nothing that I lack. He lets me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He renews my life. He leads me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even when I go through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live." And so this idea of Him leading us and doing these things, and there's the term of like He leads me down, some versions say like the path of righteousness, or He leads me down the right path. And so as we're thinking about our attitude and we're thinking about the path that we're going down, a big evaluation is, am I walking down the right path where my attitude would lead others to Jesus? When people look at us, do our attitudes and the way that we present ourselves and the way that we act, does that point people to Jesus? And in that evaluation, in this whole idea, which path are we on? Because the closer we become to Jesus, as David tells us in this psalm, He'll lead us down the right path. So if we aren't on the right path tonight, then it's because we're not allowing our shepherd, Jesus, to lead us in the right path. And there was a quote in this book about that I thought was really good that I wanted to read to you. And it says this: "Walking on paths of righteousness is not a stroll in the park. It is the very path where battle is waged for our souls, and where we join the Holy Spirit in doing in our lives the relentless work of sanctification, of living a life that looks more and more like the shepherd who leads us down the path." Christian, are you aware of the sin struggles in your life? Some sin seems to come with the territory more than others. And in reflecting on my life and on the lives of other leaders I've known, it's very easy for these sin struggles to just slip in and us not even realize it. And that comment on, we think about that, the path that Jesus leads us down. Many times we equate that with like just it being easy, or He's always providing for me, or like the cliche, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, which is correct. But we forget, just like this book said, the path of righteousness, or down the right path, that is the battleground for where the war of your soul is taking place. And so that is not going to be easy. And you're going to have things come up every single day that try to take you off of that path, that try to distract you, try to change your attitude, try to help you lose focus. And so you have to be aware of that. And one way that you can be aware, that you can constantly remind yourself to do the right thing, to have the right attitude, to be on the right path, is to evaluate. Have people in your life who can speak to you with truth and love when you get off the path, and can say, "Hey, I don't know what's up, but something's different. Something's off. What's going on with you?" And they can speak words in your life that you need to hear, but they can do it in love, and well, this person is close to me, so I can trust them. They'll do that in private. They'll help you. They'll push you. Evaluation. So the first thing in the attitude that makes a difference, or moving from intention to action, is the attitude to evaluate. So we need to evaluate this. The second point, the attitude to empty. We're going to see this in verse 21 through 28. So he says this: "For me, living is Christ and dying is gain. Now if I live on in the flesh, this means fruitful work for me, and I don't know which one I should choose. I am pressured by both. I have the desire to depart to be with Christ, which is far better, but to remain in the flesh is more necessary for you. Since I am persuaded of this, I know that I will remain and continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that because of me, your confidence may grow in Christ Jesus when I come to you again. Just one thing, live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or am absent, I will hear about you, that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, working side by side for the faith that comes from the gospel, not being frightened in any way by your opponents. This is a sign of destruction for them, but of your deliverance, and this is from God." So this idea of emptying. We have to empty ourselves of the things that are keeping us from having the right attitude to make a difference. Paul's talking about here, he says, you know what? In all honesty, right now, I would just assume die and go be with Jesus because my present condition is just not great. And if you haven't reached that point, there are many days when you could just be like, Jesus, I just wish you would come back and take me home because I just want to live in glory with you. That's not some kind of dangerous, suicidal thought, but it's just a thought of, we know that the coming world that's next is going to be so much better than this suffering we have here. And so he's saying, it would be really easy for me to just say, God, my purpose in life, I would just rather be with you than fulfill what you have me on earth for. Because my present condition is so bad that I don't really want to walk through this. So I would just rather give up and wait for my blessings that I have in eternity. And it will be very easy for us in days ahead to go through situations and to just have an attitude of, you know what, God, I'm just going to check out. I'm going to be done. I'd just rather be with you. I'm just not going to live this life how you're calling me to be. Paul, I think, if anybody had a right to, Paul would have a right to. He had constant things in his life that went wrong for him. He's being thrown in prison. People are mocking him. All these things are going bad, yet he says that it's better for him to be in prison, discipling and pushing Christians forward than to just be in a pity party and not be effective at all. To be honest with you, I probably wouldn't be productive with my time if I was thrown in jail for preaching the gospel. I would probably do everything other than that. And we see that Paul writes some of the most major letters in the New Testament while in a prison cell. And we aren't even that productive in our own everyday, casual, comfortable settings. So how could Paul do that? Well, he points us to that. If you look at chapter 2, he talks about that Jesus emptied himself by becoming taking on the form of a slave. And I think that Paul was kind of foreshadowing here that the only way you can have an attitude that has that, God, it would be better for me to just give up and live for you, but I'm still going to push through in my current situation. The only way you can do that is empty yourself of a few things. One thing to empty yourself of is the baggage of your sin. A lot of us don't have the right attitude about service because we hold on to the baggage of our past. And so we're carrying around that baggage, and it becomes so heavy that we can't be productive in our attitudes today because of the mistakes we made yesterday. And God is telling us, I've forgiven you of that. Now move forward and be productive for me. Have an attitude that can make a difference. Another thing is our pride. There's a lot of opportunities that we may have that we think is beneath us, or we think that's for somebody else, and so we don't have the right attitude going into it because we haven't emptied ourselves of that pride, of whatever's holding us back. I'm too good for that job, or I don't have the right skills for that job. Whatever it is, we allow pride in our life to keep us from doing it. A question here that I want you to answer is, how can your attitude keep you from living like you should? How do you think your attitude can keep you from living like you should?
Sometimes I think that we can pile it on and say, well, I did this, this, and this. Surely I don't have to go on through and do this and this as well. We've done good enough.
Yeah.
There's no need to proceed forward.
Yeah. Who else? How can our attitude keep us from living how we should? So, just think about the idea of serving. I'll use our church for example. There are people who, nursery. We'll just talk about nursery in the church. Parents who have kids are like, I don't think I should serve in the nursery because I have to put up with my kid 24/7. And I would like 1 hour a week where I could just listen to the message. But then there's other people who are like, well, I'm older. I've already spent my time in the nursery. I've had my kids. They have their kids. Now's my time to just take off. And then you have the people in the middle who are like, oh, you know what? They're not my kids. Why should I keep them? And so the attitude behind such an important position, or in something as simple as keeping the nursery, that is constantly a position that is hard to fill, really boils down to people just have a bad attitude about it. They don't realize that the gospel is proclaimed to a large group of people because somebody sits in a room with babies and takes care of them so that we don't have crying infants in a service so that everybody can pay attention. That is as just important of a role as the person who plays the piano, just as important role as the ushers who pass the offering plate, just as important of a role as the person who does sound and makes sure the microphone is on and off. But a lot of times people don't have the right attitude, they don't have the right perception of it, and so they don't want to do it. You might think, well, why should I share the gospel to my family? That's what we have a minister for. Why do we pay the preacher if I'm the one that's going to have to share the gospel to my brother, to my sister, to whatever? And while that seems petty and while that seems far-fetched, there are a lot of people. You would be surprised how many people I've had come up to me and like, I need you to come invite my nephew to church. And my first reply every time is, why don't you invite your nephew to church? Like, why should I be the one to invite your nephew? And they're like, well, you're the student pastor. Isn't that your job? And I said, no, it's not. And it always catches them off guard. And I tell them, my job is not to do what God is calling you to do. And that's the same for you. Like, if God has laid somebody on your heart, if God has convicted you about somebody, don't go to your Sunday school teacher. Don't go to your pastor. Like, yeah, you can have them support you, but if God has laid them on your heart, then you need to have the attitude of, I'm going to do everything I can to reach them for Jesus because He's convicting me to do it. We have on our church roll probably 1,400 members. There's no way our church staff can reach out to every individual member. There's not. There's no way that our deacons can reach out to every member. But that's why the gospel, it did not say, go all you pastors and deacons into the world and make disciples. He says, just go. That's everybody. And so it's all about the attitude that we have about it. And when we all start seeing the attitude of, it doesn't matter if I'm a pastor or if I'm a hairdresser or if I'm a nurse or if I work in HVAC or if I cut grass, it doesn't matter what I do. I'm a pastor in that own role. I'm an evangelist in that role. God has called me to reach the world for the gospel no matter what my professional vocation is. It's all about the attitude, and it takes that emptying of ourselves. We have to say, God, in order for you to adequately fill me, I have to empty myself of me. And so many times we don't give God our whole heart. We say, God, you can have this much of me, but I'm going to keep these things back for myself. These pet sins, or I'm going to keep back these struggles, or I'm going to keep back these insecurities. And God, you can have the rest of it, but you can't have these areas. And for Him to make the largest impact in our attitude and in our actions, we have to empty ourselves of ourselves. And so we have to evaluate, we have to empty. Thirdly, we have to have the attitude to exalt. Exalt. The idea of exalting is to lift up higher than anything else. And they use this word, so there's a story in the Old Testament of Moses, and he's leading the people out of Israel, and the people of Israel were just a bunch of whiny people that just, I mean, honestly, they were probably like your typical church congregation, but God blessed them each and every day. He provided for them, He did all these things, and yet they constantly complained. Over and over and over again, they complained. God, we're tired of this manna. We're tired of this water. And He just constantly pours out His blessing on them, and all they do is complain. And this is one of those stories in the Bible that you're like, dang, God, like I didn't know that was in there. But like, God sent poisonous snakes throughout the camp. And they were biting people, and people were dying. And He was doing that to get their attention, to show them that He's the one that's protecting them. And so they start crying out to Moses, Moses, we're so sorry that we've sinned against God. So Moses goes on behalf of the people to God, what do I need to do? And he tells him to make this like stick pole thing of a snake and to hold it up. And when people look at it and they see it, they'll be healed from the venom where they've been bit. And so this idea of exalting points back to that picture of Moses holding up that snake, and when people looked at it, they were healed and they weren't killed. And so for us, this attitude of exalting is, what are we lifting up on our poles for people to look at for their salvation? Because the Bible tells us that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. It doesn't say under the name of Ryan or under the name of insert your name. And so many times we try to exalt ourselves. And that pole that we're lifting up for people to see as salvation has our picture on it. It has our name on it. And so our attitude is, I'm going to do whatever I can for people to look at me and say, oh, what a great person that is, or look how much they're serving, or look how good they do. And this idea of what you're lifting up for people to see for their salvation is really the attitude of how you carry yourself and present yourself in your life. And so if people see you, do they see Jesus? If people look at your attitude, if they look at your actions, would that point them to a relationship with Jesus? Would that point them to mercy and grace and goodness? And these things that we see that are fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, and patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. A lot of us, we probably don't have that fruit in our life because our attitudes are poor, and we would rather lift ourselves up to save people than lift Jesus up. So tonight, as we leave and we're thinking about our attitude, I want you to think about this thing that I have at the bottom. What are 3 practical things you can do this week to impact others through your attitude? So I want you to take a minute and you just think about that for yourself. What are 3 practical things you can do this week to impact others through your attitude? And I'll tell you my 3. So 3 that I've been thinking through, 3 that I wrote down because I know that I don't do this. And so these are things that I struggle with, just to be honest and transparent. And I'm going to try to work on this week to have a better attitude. The first thing that I wrote down is that I will try to impact others through my attitude by not trying to always be right. Part of our pride is that in situations we always have to be the one that's right. And there are times when even if you are right, you just have to step away and say, look, it's fine. We agree to disagree. Or if things happen, like Facebook arguments are like the dumbest thing in the world, but we see it happen all the time. Like people will live and die by a Facebook post. Like it drives me crazy. But like one way that you can point people to Jesus is like you don't have to have the last word. Like let somebody else win the argument if that's what they want to do, and show Jesus through that. Second, find one selfless act to do every day. One act that you won't get any credit for, one act that I won't get any credit for, one thing that is just genuinely for somebody else. That's one thing I'm going to try to do this week. I'm just going to try to do at least one selfless act for somebody else every day. And the third thing is I'm going to try to find joy in every situation. There's a difference in happiness and joy. I might not be happy about every situation. There's a good chance that before we walk through that door tonight, there will probably be a situation that could happen that I'm just not happy about. But I can still find joy in it that God, like you provided that situation to help me grow. Or you provided that situation for me to practice patience even though I didn't show great patience in that situation. And again, that goes back to evaluation. In that moment, I might not show great joy, but it's how we steam on it later because I'm a very introspective person. Like I think about my like things that happen throughout my day for a while. And so if somebody upsets me and makes me mad, chances are I'm still thinking about it 3, 4, 5 days later. Like I'm playing that conversation over in my head. I'm like, oh, I should have said this. Or if that ever happens again, I'm going to do that. And I just stew on it. And so one thing that I'm going to try to do this week to change my attitude is, and that kind of goes back to my first point, don't always try to be right. But instead of trying to get even in those situations, I'm going to try to find joy in those situations to help me be a better person. Because before we can encourage other people to be better people, we have to look at ourselves and say, how can I be a better person? And I really like what Connor said last week. A lot of times it's easy to look at this idea of what can we do, what can we do, what can we do? And I really want us to just kind of think about how can we just rest in God this week to help change our attitude? Because a lot of the reasons that we have poor attitudes is because we're running on empty. And we're trying to pour out into other people and we don't have anything left in our cup because we haven't let God fill it up. And so what can you do this week to help God or to allow God to pour His blessing and His love and all of His stuff into you so that you can pour out into other people better. Because if you're just running on empty, chances are you're going to have a poor attitude. The place of like all of this stuff that happens normally is in the place of burnout, or in the place of exhaustion, or in the place of just you're tired. And so how can you this week rest in God better? Actually observe, like Connor said, a Sabbath, a time of rest where you just spend time and you'll say, God, I'm going to allot you, I'm going to block off this much time a day, whatever that is for you, and you just spend time with Him to help Him fill you up. Whatever that is for you, whatever practical things, I hope that your attitude is something that you try to work on and you try to make better. And it's just something that it's kind of like a different topic to talk about, but it's something that all throughout the Bible is talked about. And it's like it says in verse 29 and 30, for it has been given to you, that is deliverance, on Christ's behalf, not only to believe in Him, but to also suffer for Him, having the same struggle that you saw I had, and now hear that I have. And so the crazy thing is, like so many times, people believe that if they trust in Jesus, their life will be problem-free. And here we see in the Bible that deliverance from our sin not only leads us to believe in Jesus, but to suffer like Jesus. And if the world hated Him, they're going to hate us. And so if we have a bad attitude about that, we're going to be ineffective in this mission that God has left us on. It's all about the attitude, the focus, the perspective that we have in our lives. And I love the quote that says that while bad things happen to good people can happen to bad things. And there couldn't be situations that maybe aren't the best, but that you can speak truth and you can speak the gospel into this week. And you can help change people's attitude by the way that you handle yourself and the way that you handle your attitude.